This is script for different gender roles. First is the male gaze. Male gaze is a way of looking at women in different ways and in all types of media that frames through a male centered. That frames through a male center, often objectifying perspectives. How it works. The camera acts like a male spectator, lingering on the bodies, breaking down women's into parts, or prioritizing beauty over personality. This can make the women look passive or vulnerable to male viewers and looked in at a sexual way rather than in a divine sort of way. Therefore, it makes the men feel like they can look at women because that's what the camera is showing you. That's what they want you to see, giving the men reassurance that it's okay for them to be sexually active. The male gaze in films. A very well-known example of the male gaze is in the movie Transformers, which is a kids' movie that came out in 2007, which cites modern male gaze by showing Michaela, played by Megan Fox. In this scene, the camera focuses on her body and panning slowly up and down her body until she leans over the car, focusing on her stomach, her legs, and her lips before showing her face. This moment doesn't reveal anything about the character itself, or nothing about her personality. Instead, it just shows her as an object of visual attraction for the audience. Queer cinema. Queer cinema refers to a broad, evolving body of film that revolves around the LGBTQ identities. It also is about their challenges and their traditional norms about gender and sexuality. How it works. Queer cinema refers to film that are driven by LGBTQ community and that express their experiences and perspectives, often pushing back against films that usually star a straight male man as the main protagonist. It spans over experimental independence and documentary, giving full visibility to marginalized identities and reshaping how gender and sexualities are understood on screen. Early films often hid queer characters through subtext or stereotypes due to censorship. Queer cinema in film. A widely recognizable film that includes examples of queer cinema is Moonlight, which came out in 2016, which is a film that follows the life of a young black man as he grapples with his sexuality and his identity, and a sense of belonging. It is often highlighted because it brings the experience to the center of the narrative, which includes emotional depth and visual intimacy. How as social attitudes shifted the change, that changed queer cinema from being something that films had to hide from becoming very mainstream to it being very popular just in a couple of decades. Feminist film theory. Feminist film theory explains how cinema constructs gender, power, and representation, asking whose perspective is centered and how that shapes what audience sees. It emerged in the 1970s alongside second wave feminism and has since become one of the most influential frameworks in film studies. History of female filmmakers. Female filmmakers have shaped cinema from its earliest days, even when the industry tried to erase or minimize their contributions. Their work spans silent era innovations, mid-century resilience, and contemporary breakthroughs that have refined who gets to tell stories and how those stories look on screen. The representation of men. The representation of men in film history has shifted across era, genres, and cultural expectations, moving from the rigid stereotypes to more varied and emotionally complex portrayals. Across much of cinema's past, men were just framed as heroes, protectors, or figures of power. But along recent decades, it's changed these norms and expanded what masculinity can look like on screen. How it works. Men were still typically, and are still, shown as strong, individual, and in control. They drive the narrative and usually solve problems throughout the film. And how they are embodied? Idols of physical and intellectual strength. These portrayals are reinforced what scholars called hegemonic masculinity, emphasizing power, independence, and emotional reassurance. Common traits shown up are physical and intellectual strength, independence, and self reliance. Sexual attractiveness tries to use dominance and leadership and authority. Men represented in film. In the film Die Hard, John McClane embodies the late 20th century idol of the tough, resilient, emotionally restrained man that he is in the film. He is shown as someone who is physically capable to solve problems on his own through force and improvisation, and rarely expresses vulnerability or emotion. These align with broader patterns of Hollywood, portraying men as dominant, self-reliant heroes that will carry the narrative.